Welcome back to DeezyVision. Today we are here at the Pompey Museum of Slavery and Emancipation. As of today's date, it is Monday, January 31st, 2022, and this is actually the reopening day of the Pompey Museum because they have been closed down since 2020. We all know why. We all know what happened in 2020, and they have been closed, and today is reopening day, so I definitely had to come down and check it out because this is a place that I actually wanted to visit for a long time. And so today I am going to capitalize off of reopening day, and we're going to go in and we're going to see exactly what the Pompey Museum has to offer. So if you're ready, come on, let's go. Now before we head on the inside, I want to show you a little more of the outside of the building. And the Pompey Museum is named after a slave by the name of Pompey, and he started a slave revolt which made him famous. So let's head on the inside and let's learn a little bit more about slavery and emancipation. Okay, once you made your way on the inside of the museum, you see this picture here on the wall, the wreck of the Peter Marlowe. And this will be to your left once you walk into the museum. This is Chris Davis. He works here at the Pompey Museum, and he's going to be, showing us around and showing us what the Pompey Museum has to offer us as far as history and what we can learn here.
Yeah, man. So this is actually the first panel that you see when you come into the museum, right? And this little model right here. Both of these are extremely important because they speak, oftentimes people say, oh, well, I ain't going to talk about slavery, or I don't want to hear about this and that, but people actually don't realize that there are many different aspects to our story, and even within all of that suffering, we still define things to be proud of, things that unify us and stuff like that, right? So one of the what this does is deal with some of the common misconceptions about slavery and defining slavery. Oftentimes you hear in the narrative and the waves out there, you hear all sorts of things about Africans and slavery and all of this stuff, and Africans already had slavery, but all of those things are pretty much untrue, you understand, in ways that people twist facts to kind of benefit those that benefited from what we call chattel slavery. So what our ancestors experienced in the Bahamas, Jamaica, United States, what we call slavery was actually chattel slavery. And so this was different and apart than even, say, medieval Europe, when it was like that, or feudal Japan, because chattel slavery was based, first of all, on race. You understand? That means you, a slave forever, just because of who you are, and your children are slaves forever, just because of who they are. And when you look at slavery in different societies, it was never as rigid. It was never such a strong level of oppression, level of abuse. And essentially, chattel means that it just strips you of all humanity. You understand? And there are very few instances in human history that can compare to that in terms of the deviance and the level of savagery that many of our ancestors experienced. Now, on one side of it, of course, it speaks to the strength of our ancestors, how strong we are. But the other side of it is, as when we look at any illicit industry, and you look at the illicit drug industry, you see these fellas at the top, the Pablo Escobars and the El Chapos, right? And when we look at that, we know who's responsible for that. But for some reason, when we look at our history, particularly when we're dealing with slavery, we don't look at it the same way. You understand? So we will say, oh, well, look at this one who do that to his own brother, but not looking at the bigger picture. But when you look at West Africa was actually destroyed by the transatlantic slave trade, utterly destroyed. While Western Europe, the Bahamas, America, Canada, from Peru straight up to Canada, all of this was built off of the slavery of our ancestors as well as indigenous Americans. So this part is very important. And how people became enslaved in pre-colonial Africa, before the contact of Europeans, was quite different. Prisoners of war. And slavery was also used as a form of punishment. As a matter of fact, including myself, many scholars only use the term slavery to describe that because it's common in the vernacular. So when we say that, we already know what we mean. But in actuality, it's more so a form of indentured servitude, a form of serfdom, you understand? And still rigid and still wrong, of course, class system. But it was nothing like our ancestors experienced over here, particularly when you look at the amount of wealth that was made from the transatlantic slave trade and then the plantation slavery that covered there. And we're often told that slavery is easy in the Bahamas, mild in the Bahamas. One of the reasons for it is most of our history was given us by people who are not from here. You know, white, if I can speak frankly, white British men with a paternalistic outlook. So they look at us as descendant of these Africans who would just be poor and rugged in Africa, if not for them coming and civilizing us. And of course, using slavery to do so. Of course, they're being sarcastic there, but you get my point. So this is very important right here. And this kind of does away with all of the myths, you know. And as a matter of fact, the word slave comes from people from Eastern Europe. Slav, you understand? These people that stretch all the way from around Croatia, straight all the way to Eastern Russia. You know, and these were the people who were considered the bottom rung of society in Europe. You know, and it was in form of indenture and stuff like that, mostly even then. But what happened to our ancestors was most definitely unprecedented. And that's very important for us to know and understand. Nothing like that never happened before on that level and on that scale and for that duration of time, and with that level of profitability. This right here, this model is of a slave ship known as the Peter Mowell that actually wrecked on Lynyard Key off the coast of Abaco in late 1860.
This the same thing we see in that picture on the wall up there?
No. I can explain that one too. Right. That one got to do with reparations actually.
All right.
This has to do with the whole plight of the liberated Africans in the Bahamas. Now, my personal view is I argue that they were not liberated Africans because they would have still got caught, taken through the Middle Passage, taken away from their home, taken away from their religion, taken away from their name, taken away from their culture, and brought into a British colony where you are required to be more British and just to get by. They were paid less money even than the ex-slaves to do certain jobs, you know. So now, where that term does apply, in my view, are those African Americans who would have got freed in that because they was already enslaved, and then they got freed afterwards. You understand what I'm saying? So this is the Peter Mowell, and this is actually a model of what happened. If you see the spar from the ship, this ship came from the Congo River region. It had about 364 people, and the overwhelming majority were children. And many of these children ended up being settled in the Bahamas. And this story actually tells you a lot about this fallacy that the British used, you know, this British propaganda of them liberating Africans, even after they practiced slavery for about 250 years. All of a sudden, they're the heroes and they're trying to save everybody. And even in 1860, almost more than 2 decades after slavery ended in the Bahamas, these children, many of them ended up breaking salt in Anagua and Turks Island, doing the same jobs that people were doing while they were enslaved. And they would commission a 7 to 14-year apprenticeship period. So many of these liberated Africans were forcibly employed for white Bahamians for 7 to 14 years. So if you came in here as a liberated African after 1838, you was at the bottom rung of society. You were, in many instances, you were almost living as a slave. And when you look at the newspapers, you know, the types of punishments they would get for simply not wanting to do a task. You know, they would get like 20 lashes. And it's virtually no difference between the way they treated them and the enslaved. So for me, liberated African is not the term. However, you could also argue that had this not have happened and had they not ended up here, things could have been a lot worse. They could have ended up New Orleans doing sugar cane, and as you understand what I'm saying. So I say that to say this is very nuanced and it's not a one-size-fits-all story. So these weren't just a bunch of people who come here and was happy because, you know, this and that. And of course, we have many prominent families, well-known families to have descended from people from these ships. Of course, like Cleveland Aeneas and his entire family, who wrote the book Baintown, they come from the Yoruba people that landed on a ship known as the La Rosa, right? Not the Rosa from Adelaide, but the La Rosa that crashed around between and Abaco. You also have the Harveys and the Balfours, and the Balfours are Adelaide. So typically these liberated Africans, they will be named after the governor who was in charge at the time that they got them. And this was like in the days of slavery, you know, you had to take away your name and give you a British name and stuff like that. So again, this all points to the plight that we have. And it's key to remember too the amount of money, the amount of profits that was made from this, you know. And even if you were not an extremely wealthy person, you know, if think about it like this, if you have two people who on your back and call all day, every day, and you need a fence in your yard built, you get them two people to build a fence. So the level of benefits that were received by those that own enslaved people is also lost in translation. And it's directly linked to the gap in wealth that we see between people of African descent and European descent, whether we're talking about the Bahamas, whether we're talking about the Caribbean, the Americas, or the entire world, and those are factual. Slave trade is extremely important because, of course, our history doesn't start with slavery. We say that African history begins with slavery. We say that all human history begins with slavery because, of course, we are the first and we are the original. So it's things that we take for granted that we do, things like agriculture, husbandry. These were the things that help us as humans form societies and communities. This was the things that allowed us to say we don't have to worry about where the next meal coming from every day. Be able to sit down and chill, form societies, and then when you don't got to worry about where the next meal coming from, you know what you get to do? You get to sit down and think. And this is when the human brain really started to show its full potential, and we started to invent things, invent politics and all that. And so you have great kingdoms that rose and fell from the days when the Sahara was a rainforest. You understand what I'm saying? That rose and fell. The oldest mathematical artifacts, both of which are found in Africa, one is the Ashango bone. And the Ashango bone is found smack in the middle of Africa, in eastern Congo, right? And that artifact dates back to at least 25,000 years ago. And that's mathematics. 25,000 years ago in the middle of Africa. And Greece, Hellas as they call it, came around in 800 BC. So you can compare 20,000 BC to 800 BC is no comparison, and that's just one example. And there's an artifact much older than that called the Lubombo bone. That was found oddly in deep South Africa. And the Lubombo bone is anywhere between 40,000 and 60,000 years old. And that was also a mathematical artifact. And that is the oldest known mathematical artifact ever found in the world, right? Now, these pictures, this one here actually portrays, depends on how you look at it, you could say it portrays the early Congo Christian kings of the mid-1400s. But who they really portray, in my view, are the Kandaki queen. So we all know a woman, a girl, have a sister, auntie, mother, anything named Candace, right? Now Candace, the name Candace actually means Ethiopian queen, or Cushite queen, or Meroitic queen, right? It's kind of interchangeable because all Nubia, is almost like Caribbean, and then within that you have all sorts of different people under that umbrella, you understand? But essentially these were the first Christians that we know of. All of the oldest churches in the world, for the most part, are areas known as Lalibela, Ethiopia, along the Nile Valley. Now, the Candaces, or the Kandakis, they were a long line of warrior queens. And anytime you look at like a map of the Roman Empire, you ever notice that map of the Roman Empire never make it past a certain point in Africa? And that was because of these African women who were not just rulers, but also generals within their kingdom. The most famous one would have been the Queen of Sheba from the Bible, also known as Empress Makeda in real life. But you also had other counterparts to her. For example, Queen Amanirenas, my personal favorite. And Queen Amanirenas defeated Julius Caesar and embarrassed him in war. And to the point where she pushed his forces out of much of Africa, cut off all the statues to his head, put all the images under her sandals and all that stuff. This woman was like a Beyonce, but for that time, just everything, every woman would be like her. And she did that in a masterstroke and political move, saying that I want all my enemies, all my subjects to trample on the head of my enemy, who was the late great Augustus Caesar. You understand? Furthermore, she did one of the biggest, I don't know what to call it, but I guess we would call it a boss move or a swing or something like that in Bahamian terminology, right? But essentially, when Augustus was there and he came down to Egypt to meet with her, she was like, man, I ain't got no time to meet with this fella, he's a big time queen, I get, But she sent her messenger with a basket of golden arrows. And she said, if you come in peace, take the arrows as a gift. If you come for war, keep the arrows because you will need them. And what you think Augustus Caesar do? Turn around and keep it moving. But they don't talk about that aspect of the great Roman Empire, the so-called greatest army that has ever lived. You understand? This is just an example of some of the pre-colonial, pre-slavery kind of cities and societies that would have formed all over West Africa. And again, we usually focus on that Nile Valley, you understand, and it's always about Egypt and Kemet, but you had many, many, many other stone cities all throughout Africa, from the south to the west, to the north, to the northwest. You know, you even have a place known as Kumbi Sala, and Kumbi Sala is in present-day Mauritania, Mali area. And if you look at Kumbi Sala, you would not be able to tell the difference between that and ancient Egypt. And you have historians like Ibn Battuta, so these were men from Europe. Some of them were Arab men who were from Europe, you know, the Moors and stuff like that. And they came down to ancient Ghana, and they said that the horses and dogs were dressed better than the kings and queens of Europe, with the gold-laden streets. And this was the reasons why Europe started to target Africa, you understand? It wasn't initially slavery even, you know? Now, over here, this is quite important too, because these are just two examples of the different types of currency in West Africa, of which there were like about 13 or 14 distinct, what we would call universal tenders in that region, right? So, you know, money is the one thing, that's the only thing you could spend everywhere. It's now beginning to change. And you could see the benefits that some of these people who deal with cryptocurrency get from doing it. And so it was actually quite a similar process back then, where you had other forms of currency that were not attached, you know what I mean? And you were not obligated to use. So you had things like manillas, and these were a little bit closer to home, called kissy pennies. And this one was actually found somewhere around Jumbe village. And Jumbe village got their artifacts from Africans who was already living in the Bahamas. All my Grammy was a liberated African, and that's how they collected a lot of it. And so this kissy penny comes from present-day Sierra Leone. And this was used as currency in Sierra Leone all the way up until the 1950s. It was also used to make tattoos and stuff like that as well. But it just shows you the entirely different concept of economy and currency that existed in Africa, that of course is now almost completely dead. And that has contributed to the exacerbation of what happened to us over there, right? Now this man here is Mansa Musa. A lot of people know him, hear him referenced in rap songs and stuff like that. This is the richest person in human history. The highest estimate I've seen him being worth is more than $1 trillion. The lowest estimate I've seen is $400 billion. Either one of those numbers still make him the richest person in human history, right? He builds a mosque every Friday in his kingdom. He was known to be very generous. His uncle, actually, Abu Bakari II, sent a flotilla of about 200 ships to the west. And I'm sure many people are now beginning to hear about Africans that made it to the Western Hemisphere before Europeans, before Christopher Columbus. And his predecessor was one of them, Abu Bakari II, right? And here you can see a mention to the King of Ghana again, and you can see the year 1067. So it's important to note now, these periods of history we're talking about, you know what they call those periods of history in Europe? The Dark Ages, the medieval period, the Black Death, and blah, blah. But in Africa, we were thriving. Africa has three, I would say 6 golden ages when you take the whole history, but in our known history, we have about 3 or 4 golden ages. And this is considered the last golden age, from the 1000s going in to when the first Europeans started to arrive and encroach, right? You also have the Empire of Songhai, one of the biggest kingdoms in Africa, bigger than all of Western Europe, founded by men like Sunni Ali. Sunni Ali was probably one of the greatest geniuses of all time, and we never hear about him. This man, it would be like you take over the United States, and just out your head and off of memory, you were able to administrate all of your policies, just off a memory of the head, and he was just highly organized. Sunni Ali is considered the greatest civil administrator of all time. Any queen, and that's Europe, Asia, of all time, the greatest civil administrator is Sunni Ali of the Songhai Empire, right? Just because this level of organization. Now, Songhai, Mali, which is where Mansa Musa was from, ancient Ghana, one of their major cities was Timbuktu, right? Now, Timbuktu is a word that's in our language, but we don't really know a lot of times what it was. Timbuktu is usually said when you're referencing somewhere far, so you send someone to get something to you from the shop, and they take 5 hours to come and play, you've been Timbuktu it. That expression literally comes to us directly from our ancestors who came from Africa, because Timbuktu was a very desolate city, but still a grand city in itself. And Timbuktu is one of the more influential cities of the medieval period. So even when you look at like the Silk Road, Timbuktu was one of the major places for the Silk Road and trade, you know. But even on top of the Silk Road and the trade, it was also a place of education. So you have like the University of Sankore, and in and around Timbuktu, you had another ancient city named Gao, one of the oldest cities in the world, right there as a part of the Songhai Empire as well. The Europeans that founded the University, for example, of Salamanca in Spain, they actually took the curriculum from the Kingdom of Mali to make that university. And people don't like to talk about how they copied these Islamic Africans of the medieval period in establishing their own university. A few years ago, Kanye West, who usually is in social media for the wrong reasons, he made a very troubling statement, and he said, you know, that slavery seems like a choice. That seemed like a choice, you know, speaking on our ancestors. Tools like these, and this weighs about 30, 40 pounds right here, and this was one that was actually used on a child, you know, and this was just a typical punishment for you. And they would not have all of these instruments of torture and restraint if it was a choice. You understand what I'm saying? And it was all about being in survival mode. You understand? Just like right now, God forbid, but if a fellow walking there with a gun robbing us, you know, I know you and a man who work for your money and you would just give all your money to someone, but if he put a gun in your face, you can give that to him. You understand? And because what changes in that scenario is you are now in acute survival mode. And this ain't nothing to do with morality. This has to do with our basic human instinct. Something hot, you can move your hand. You know, someone starts shooting, you can run and duck because you know your life is in danger. And so that was pretty much the same thing in a lot of these cases. People constantly try to run. And in the Bahamas, we have well over 500 incidences of runaway slaves in the Bahamas, and that's just the ones that they reported. You understand? And so many of us in the Bahamas who study history, we make the claim that we were, if not the highest, among the highest runaways per capita. You understand? And this points to not a passive Bahamian slave at all. This points to one that was always in constant resistance to slavery, you know. And of course, we have similar stories here. You know, in the Bahamas, we had maroon communities. You know, people used to steal boats, leave from Eastern New Providence and go and run away to places like Black Point, and live in these cays as maroons and away from slavery. And only when William Wiley and Lord Dunmore Lewis came to get a bunch of guns and bring the troops, they caught a bunch of the people that was living like that. And then they took a man named Emmanuel and they hung him and they put his body at the eastern end of Paradise Island. But within that, this community lasted for almost 10 years of people who were stealing boats and running away, you know. And when you hear the word maroon, it's usually associated with Jamaica, Haiti, but we had it here in the most unique ways in the Bahamas. And it's also considered the ultimate way of fighting against slavery. You know, these people saying, I'd rather live in the bush and drink rainwater and do this instead of living as a slave. And we have to rethink our history in the way that we look at ourselves, because these are the people who are the real national heroes. You know, there's no politics involved in that. Ain't no arguments there. This was when our ancestors were in their most troubling times, under extreme duress. You know, you were in the risk of being enslaved. So those that fought against that system should be, in my view, at the pedestal of our national heroes, you know, above any politician, above any of them. Yeah. So the origins of John Canoe has always been a very evasive and complex topic, you know. Now this right here is one of the typical ones that you would see, and it's not, I wouldn't say it's incorrect, but this one talks to more of the evolution of John Canoe than the origins, because John Canoe is based on a man who is known to us as John Canoe, and this is a name that's familiar to all of us, but we don't kind of know who he is. He is the namesake of our national festival known as John Canoe. He was an Ahanta chief, warrior, and merchant. He was extremely wealthy, not because he was a slave trader, but because, well, he wasn't a slave trader. He cleared it up now. And this was why the Africans took so much admiration over him, you understand? Because he was different and he was unique. And not only that, he was actually winning battles against the British and the Dutch. But as he would have lost some of these battles, Those people that lost were then taken into the British and the Dutch slave trade. And this is connected to us in numerous ways. Don't forget, Nassau is not a British term, it's a Dutch term. And so at that time, and you know the politics, they were inextricably linked. You understand? And so this man, John Canoe, his real name was Gian Quao, or Gian Corne, right? G-A-G-Y-A-N. And all that we do in this John Canoe celebration is in commemoration of a man that fought against slavery, fought for freedom, and won several battles, you understand? And interestingly, one of his major military strategies was to invade European forts on Christmas Day. But what they tell us, the slave master let us celebrate John Canoe on Christmas Day. You understand? So that's all I give you on that one for now.
Yeah.
But yeah. So just know, my people, John Canoe was an African warrior and merchant who all of us could be proud of and love, you know? Yeah, I give you that one. That's a treat though. It's time in here. You know? Yeah. You know, but this part is also true because the Yoruba people come from southern Nigeria, and that's where most of us come from when you look at the transatlantic slave trade. Like physically. Most of us, that's why we used to do Asu draw. Asu draw was a form of Yoruba banking. You see what I'm saying? And of course, when you look at Asu, trust me, bro, as much as we've been severed from it, there's certain things they can't take from us. Asu was done almost exclusively by women in Africa. And tell me if you'd rather go into Asu with a woman or a man. Women, right? And it's usually women who do the Asu.
Right.
Because in the Yoruba culture, they were the ones that dealt with the market, dealt with the money. And it was just a higher level of respect that they gave to women, a higher level of responsibility, you know, where women were essentially breadwinners in a lot of situations. You know, they're the ones that brought in the income, even though the man may have been still considered the head of the family, if you will. And so definitely the evolution and the origins of John Canoe is what can sometimes be that confusion.
Also here at the Pompey Museum, they have a gift store that is right here in the museum, and you can get Bahamian-made products. I'm looking here on the shelf, Bahamian-made products that you can eat. Looks like some jams, sauces, honey, and then they have books that you can see here. They sell books. I see a cooking book. It's another cooking book here. Then more books here on the shelf. And if you look straight ahead, I see they have a book here that was written by Sidney Poitier. So they also have a gift store here in the museum. Okay, this is more stuff at the gift store. Bahamian-made products, some dolls, salt and pepper shaker. Look like some fridge magnets. Purchase a handmade purse, some t-shirts. You got flags here, handmade kitchen mittens. So you can even come and buy Bahamian-made stuff when you visit the do it for today's video. I want to thank Pompey Museum. Thanks to Chris Davis for giving us that wonderful tour and so much amazing information. A lot of that I didn't even know. I don't know about you, but a lot of the information he gave I didn't even know about. So if you live here in the Bahamas, make sure you go check out Pompey Museum. You're going to learn so much about your history, the history of slavery and emancipation, even history of the Bahamas. And if you're visiting, make sure you ask your taxi or tour guide to take you there. It is worth it. Now, I paid $3 plus tax, you know, to visit the museum because I'm a resident. Non-residents, you're going to pay $5 plus tax, and children, regardless, are going to pay $2 plus tax. So make sure that you go on out and check out the Pompey Museum. And if you enjoyed today's video, make sure you hit the thumbs up button, give it a big like because it really helps the channel. And if you haven't as yet, make sure you go ahead and subscribe so that you're kept up to date to when I upload new content. And also make sure to check out all the links I left in the description section for you. So until next time, I'll see you in the next video.